So hello and welcome to the New Gig podcast. I'm your host, Glen Hodgson, and today I'm delighted to be joined by the CEO of Parkamo, the app revolutionizing parking, Katharina Wagner. Katharina, good to have you on the show.
Hi, Glenn. Great to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
It's a pleasure. So let's kick off by you just saying a little bit about your background in the transport and technology sector, as well as introducing Parkamo to some of the people who maybe haven't heard of it yet.
Sure. So I've been in mobility for the last 8 years. This is kind of my second life, second career.
Yeah.
When I joined Car2Go back then, which is a subsidiary, or used to be a subsidiary of Mercedes-Benz Daimler, pioneering free-floating car sharing in Europe and North America. It's been super exciting, really building a new category of mobility around Europe. And after that, I co-founded another company in the car sharing industry called Oply, which we unfortunately had to shut down again, as it goes with startups. And just recently, I joined Parkamo last year. And what's been it's been very fitting for me kind of to go into the parking industry, because all of the discussions which I had within the car sharing industry always started with parking.
Yeah.
It is a very relevant topic for the communities. When you bring in more cars on the street, where will the cars will be parked? How will you pay for the parking? How will you manage the parking in order not to congest the streets even more than there are already? And this is where Parkamo really strike me as a solution, because with Parkamo, we're really trying to enable sustainable parking from different perspectives. That means we want to reduce parking pressure on streets, but also make parking accessible and easy to use for the users. And the way how Parkamo does it is by combining various aspects. So on the one hand, we're a marketplace where all of the most relevant parking apps are integrated. So you will see at one glance all of the parking spaces available to be booked through all of the parking apps, and you don't need to switch between the apps anymore. You also have full transparency for the prices as a customer, because many people don't actually know that the parking apps also have an extra charge additional to the parking price. And now in Parkamo, you can actually see which apps might be more relevant for you because they have a lower fee for the parking than others. And then on top of that, we have direct relationships with parking garage operators to actually increase access to parking spaces. So there are still a lot of parking garages which are not digitized. You don't have an opportunity to pay for parking in a digital way. And thus, obviously, you also don't find them in any parking app. And by adding them directly through Parkamo, you get just more availability of parking space, which you can use as a customer. And for the communities, this means that more space is available to remove cars from the streets and bring them off street, and thus release a bit of pressure. And a last point which I would like to mention is actually peer-to-peer parking. It's basically the point which we're just discussing on a smaller scale. So there is a lot of private parking spaces, a lot of small businesses which have like 3 or 5 parkings, which are not used during certain times. And this is space which is not accessible at all to users at the moment. So through Parkamo, it's a bit similar like Airbnb. You can provide your private parking space in our app to rent out to users of the app. You could define times when the space is available. And with that point, we can also increase accessibility to space and increase the overall parking space, which can be used off street for private or commercial purposes.
Excellent.
And just probably one more thing, which I'd like to mention, because, coming from sharing mobility, it's been always relevant to me to actually reduce mobility on streets. And now people might think, oh, but parking actually, make it parking more convenient actually increases mobility. And the point is that car sharing is not accessible to all of the users who want to use it. It is still an urban solution in most of the cases. So there is a majority of people who are dependent on the private car, and they just don't have alternatives available. So they need an opportunity to park. And this is where Parkamo comes in. And still, to compensate a bit for the CO2 which is emitted by driving your private car, we have established a program called Green Parking, Parkamo Green Parking. And that means that with every parking which you do through the Parkamo app, we donate a certain amount to a Swedish organization called Klimatkompensera, and the money goes directly into projects, planting trees and supporting solar energy, so we can compensate together with the customers for a part of their trip.
Excellent. So it's basically green parking, which you're offering as well. This is fantastic, and increasing the efficiencies, and also increasing that need for efficiencies, that parking spaces themselves. Because I've seen some of the statistics in particularly main European cities, huge amounts of time, and not to mention frustration. Individuals just cruising, looking for parking spaces, is clogging up our roads as well.
You're absolutely right. It really depends on the city, but it's a bit, the bigger the city gets, it seems that the times which we spend in traffic rises more and more. And there is a lot of studies showing that up to 30% of that traffic is caused by cruising and searching for a parking space.
Wow.
So yeah, imagine this is, I think the city of Stuttgart was something like 140 hours per year. So it's a reasonable amount of time which you spend just in traffic. And we hope to be able to release that a bit.
So it's wasted time, increased frustration, and also all those greenhouse gases that are going into the atmosphere as well, with people just circulating, looking for a place to leave their vehicle. It sounds like a really great opportunity, and also the fact that it seems to me that if you actually increase the efficiencies, this will create more opportunity to use this space for other things, football pitches or your kids' playgrounds. This seems to be something that could benefit from this.
Yes, I love the example of the playgrounds. Now with the COVID crisis, many cities rededicated space and took it away basically from cars and took away parking space. For example, here in Munich, where we are located, you could see a lot of restaurants before they were shut down, but you could see a lot of restaurants using parking bays and putting tables out there. So it gave space back to the community. And I also love the example of Berlin, where a part of the Friedrichstraße, which is one of the main streets, was shut down completely to traffic. And they created really nice green areas, put out tables, put out benches for people to really occupy back the space. I mean, our cities have been built around so much around cars. Streets are occupying an enormous amount of the area in a city, whereas actually it's, even you could consider it's not democratic, because not every person owns a car, but we all have kind of to give space to cars, so to the people who use cars. And by creating free spaces and taking back a bit of car space to create bike lanes, to create broader pedestrian areas that, mothers with strollers can pass through, to give space to micromobility. And to the community with green areas, restaurants, etc., makes the cities more livable, I think.
So this is great opportunities for individuals, but also communities and cities. These are great opportunities that Parkamo is creating here. And I'd just like to go back to the issue about sort of the peer-to-peer parking as well, Katharina, because I like this idea here that companies and I'm looking in front of the building here, could hire out the parking spaces when they're not being used. Could I, as an individual, actually sort of sign up and actually use my drive to my house and set it up so that during certain times or on certain dates, people can actually use that as an opportunity to park their vehicle?
Yes, that's exactly the idea, Glenn. you can, the times where your parking space is not utilized, you can rent it out. And through Parkamo, people can reserve the space. They can find it in the app, obviously, and they can pay for it all digital without the need to actually meet the person and show them where their space is. Obviously, it depends a bit where your parking space is located. There might be some access restrictions which make it a bit more difficult. And depending on the number of spaces you can rent out, we can also provide a technical solution on how, for example, if you have a garage door, how this could be actually opened technically through the app. We have a Bluetooth box which we can install very, very easily, and thus enable access to your parking garage. And I think one of the issues of sharing your private space, and this is something we've learned from Airbnb also, is obviously you need trust, and you need kind of to be able to rely on who parks there and how are they going to treat this. And because it's all booked through Parkamo, we are able to track the customers, and if there should be some issues, we will provide solutions. But it takes away the anonymous part of just letting anyone parking there. And obviously the data is not shared, but we can serve as a interface for communication in case of any issues.
So it's sorting out the problems while creating a revenue stream, a real Airbnb for parking. I think this is a great solution. And also I'd like to just, if you could say a little bit more about the sector, where it's going, and maybe some of the opportunities, but also some of the barriers as well that you're seeing at the moment.
This does remind me a bit on my first days, or the first months and years actually within Car2Go, when we started and created a completely new category of mobility. So free float mobility, meaning you can take a car in one space and leave it in another, didn't really exist before. And that also resulted in a lack of regulations. So when I talked to city governments and explained them how Car2Go would work, everyone said, yeah, that's a great idea, but within the laws which we have, it is not explained in there. So how shall we allow it if there is no regulation for it? And it is a bit similar now with creating a new industry like parking, digital parking, and aggregating parking, the Airbnb aspect in there. There is still a lack of regulation for platform economy, for sharing economy. And this is obviously a challenge because, as a company, you want to build a sustainable business, and you want to be able to rely on that you can offer your service in future. And I think this is in general a problem of sharing economy, that it's so new that it's still lacking a lot of regulation and attention. So that's obviously a challenge, but I think where it's going is there are some great initiatives coming from different areas of sharing economy, looking exactly into that. And if we look, for example, into the banking sector, there has been a severe step towards sharing economy and sharing data and opening data for common use for the benefit of the customer, with the PSD2 regulation, which has been published just recently, which is basically providing opportunity for new businesses to enter this kind of old industry and using data which exists there to provide new services to consumers. And this is I expect will happen in the parking industry as well. There are a lot of initiatives looking at open data for cities and communities, because data is a public good, and there is various EU initiatives also recognizing that opening data is the way to a smarter city, is the way to raise those efficiencies we've talked about, to especially in mobility, which is such a crucial part for a city's heartbeat, really. You can say
Yeah.
it's the city's heartbeat. How, if the cars flow and if the streets are free or full with cars on the road or parked. So opening data will drive even more innovation in this area. And I think it's important that there will be data standards established, so you can easily exchange data throughout the industries and throughout also regions and countries. I mean, mobility is still a very local thing. Like every city does their own, has their own priority or their own right in creating and forming their mobility on their streets. So also the kind of data which they provide, or even if they provide any data, is completely up to them. So we're expecting still to see a bit more of norms and standards there provided by the EU as a guideline on what cities should be providing in terms of data, in what formats, and what kind of APIs should be accessible to companies in order to become smarter and greener and more sustainable in future.
Absolutely. And I think this is a great example from the banking sector. And I think it really links in as well with sort of the whole idea of data protection, GDPR, that people actually control their own data. But of course, at the same time, we share these things which are so important to facilitate our lives. It's anonymized in such a way that cities, regulators and companies can use it, but to the benefit as us as consumers and users, so we get a better experience out of this.
Yeah, I totally agree. And when you think about like how much data people provide to big platforms like Facebook or Amazon, and they don't really think about it, and it doesn't really add real value, I would say. I mean, obviously the ads are more targeted to you and you buy even more products at Amazon. But here by providing mobility data, of course, in an anonymous way, and just grouped into clusters, so you can't really see like individual patterns there. But those clusters could really improve the quality of life of each one of us. And not just buying more products, but creating more space, less traffic, cleaner air, just more livable cities, and improving also your day-to-day experience for yourself, optimizing your time, your ways, finding better ways to drive to your destination, or finding easier parking spot. This could add real value, which we all will feel. And I think that's important that this will happen.
Excellent. Well, Katharina, thanks very much indeed for your time. I shall put the link to download the app, Parkamo, and also you're available in Germany and Sweden at this present moment in time, but expanding across Europe slowly but surely.
That's true. We're focusing at the moment at the two markets. As you mentioned, Sweden and Germany is kind of our home turf. And within the next years, we'll definitely grow throughout Europe. And there is much more to come.
Excellent. Well, thank you for sharing your time today, and look forward to following the progress.
Thanks for the invitation, Glen.